The dead planet smelled like burnt metal and old silence. Dario Fenwick did not mind. He had worked in worse places. He had catalogued frozen moon fungi, scraped slime from the underside of gas giant platforms, and once spent 3 weeks in a pressurized tent on a world where the wind screamed at 200 kilometers per hour. A dead rock with a thin oxygen layer and a lot of gray dust was practically a holiday. He moved through the rubble fields slowly, scanner in one hand, sample case in the other. The asteroid strike had hit Valathroman 6 months ago. The survey team's job was simple: check for anything worth noting before the Accord flagged the world as barren and moved on. Most of the team had already moved on in spirit. He could hear them over the comm, talking about their next posting, complaining about the food on the ship, debating whether the Caresi bunk assignment system was deliberately designed to be uncomfortable for humans. Probably yes. Dario was not listening. His scanner had found something. It was a small heat signature, faint, nestled under a slab of collapsed stone near what might once have been a wall. Everything else on this planet was cold. This was not. He crouched and looked at the reading again. 31 degrees, steady, not geothermal. Geothermal readings pulsed. This was even, biological even. "Hey," he said into the comm, "I've got a heat source near grid 7. "Geothermal pocket," said Commander Riss, the Accord officer overseeing the survey. His voice had the flat, clipped sound of someone who had made up his mind before the sentence was finished. "Log it and move on. We're ahead of schedule and I intend to keep it that way." Dario looked at the reading again. 31 degrees, steady. "Right," he said. He did not move on. Instead, he set down his sample case and started shifting rubble with his gloved hands. The stones were not large. The strike had pulverized most of the structure, but there were a lot of them. He worked quietly, methodically, the way he did most things, piece by piece. It took 11 minutes. Under the last flat slab, wrapped in something that looked like hardened amber but scanned as crystallized organic material, was an egg. It was the size of a large apple. Its surface was pale, almost white, with a faint pattern of lines running through it like cracks that had healed over. Through the amber casing, he could see it very faintly, the shape inside curled still. But warm, 31 degrees, steady. Dario did not move for a moment. He just looked at it. Then he picked it up with both hands, very carefully. The amber casing was intact. The egg inside shifted, just slightly, redistributing weight. Something in there was alive enough to shift its weight. He ran a species identification scan. The scanner thought about it for a long time, longer than it ever took for anything, and came back with unidentified, no match in database. That was unusual. The Accord database held biological records for over 40,000 species. It did not say no match. Accord protocol for unidentified biological matter was clear: seal it, freeze it, ship it to Central Lab 12 on the Accord core station. The transit would take 3 weeks in cryolock. The lab processing would take another 4. He had seen what Central Lab 12 did with fragile specimens. He looked at the egg in his hands, 31 degrees, alive enough to shift. He thought about a cryolock, 3 weeks. He tucked the egg inside his environment suit, against his chest, where his own body heat would reach it through the inner layer. Then he sealed his suit back up, picked up his sample case, and walked to the manifest scanner at the edge of the survey grid. He logged one item: inert mineral sample, crystallized amber formation, grid 7. No biological flag. It was the first time in 11 years of fieldwork that Dario Fenwick had falsified a survey log. He walked back to the shuttle with the egg against his chest and did not let himself think too hard about what he was doing. He was good at that, at moving forward without examining the thing he was moving toward. It was, depending on who you asked, either his best quality or his worst. Commander Riss looked at him as he boarded. Sharp eyes, as always, 4 arms folded, as always. Anything else in grid 7? "Mineral sample," Dario said. "Logged it." Riss looked at him for exactly 1 second longer than was comfortable. Then he nodded and turned back to the pilot console. The shuttle lifted. The dead planet fell away beneath them. Dario stood near the back of the hold with his hand pressed flat against his chest, feeling the small, even warmth through the suit. Somewhere in the upper atmosphere, the egg shifted again. And then, very faintly, against his palm through 2 layers of suit material, something tapped. Once. Then again. Dario closed his eyes. He exhaled slowly. He had no idea what was in this egg. He had no idea what he was going to do next. He had 11 years of clean field record behind him and a falsified survey log that was going to cause him serious problems the moment anyone looked closely. He pressed his hand a little flatter against the egg and felt it tap back. That was enough for now. 3 weeks later, on Station Marin 7, the egg cracked. Not all at once. It started with a single thin line running down the left side, and then nothing happened for 4 hours. Dario sat on the floor of his quarters next to the modified environmental pod he had built from a heating unit, 2 spare thermal regulators, and a hydration mesh he was technically supposed to return to supply. He sat there and watched the crack and drank terrible station coffee and did not sleep. Dr. Pell found him like that at 600. She stood in his doorway for a moment, looked at him on the floor, looked at the pod, looked at the crack in the egg. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "How long have you been sitting there?" "Since yesterday," Dario said. She came in, sat on the floor next to him, and took his coffee without asking. She was that kind of friend. She looked at the egg and said, "It's going to be fine." "You don't know that." "No," she agreed, "but you've kept it at 31 degrees for 3 weeks without a single spike. If it wasn't fine, it would have already stopped being fine." She handed his coffee back. "What does the scan say?" "Still unidentified. I've run it 12 times. She looked at him. "Dario, what do you think is in there?" He did not answer, because right then the second crack appeared. They both stopped talking. The egg rocked slightly in the pod. The amber casing around it had softened over the past week, going from hard crystal to something more like thick resin. Now it was splitting along with the shell beneath, 2 layers peeling back at once, and through the gap came a sound, very small, very sharp, like a fingernail drawn across glass. Then a claw, then a nose, then a head. It was blue, not the dull blue-gray of most things that came out of eggs, a real blue, deep and vivid like the inside of a clear sky, and running through it along the jaw and down the neck were veins of gold that caught the light and held it. It was the size of his palm. Its eyes were closed. Its wings, folded flat against its back, were so thin they were nearly transparent. It lay still for a moment in the broken shell, breathing in small, quick movements. Then it opened its eyes. They were gold, both of them, looking directly at Dario's face. It looked at him for a long time. He looked back. He did not move. Then it made a sound, a soft, high note, like a single key struck on a very small instrument, and it crawled forward across the edge of the shell and onto his knee, and it sat there, and it looked at his face again, and it seemed to decide something. Pell had not breathed in about 30 seconds. "Dario," she finally whispered. "I see it. Run the scan again." He ran the scan again. The scanner was quiet for longer than usual. Then it returned a result, and this time it was not unidentified. It came back, DOACONITHMINORI, status, extinct, last confirmed sighting, 602 years ago. They both looked at the screen. They both looked at the small blue creature sitting on Dario's knee, cleaning resin off its face with the back of one tiny claw. "Extinct," Pell said. "Apparently not," Dario said. She started typing immediately, pulling up the Accord archive on Draconith. There was not much. Most of the entries were flagged restricted origin, which was not a tag either of them had seen on an extinct species before. What was available was sparse. Physical description, estimated size range, listed as companion species to a civilization called the Setharan. Gone with them, presumably, when the Setharan disappeared. The hatchling finished cleaning its face and looked at Dario again. Then it walked up his leg, over his stomach, and up his chest, and it put its head against the side of his jaw and was still. He reached up very slowly and rested one finger along its back. It made the sound again, softer this time. Pell watched this and said nothing for a while. Then she said, "Dario, someone is going to find out." "I know. You scanned it, the query is logged, Riss will see it." "I know. What are you going to do?" He looked down at the small warm weight against his jaw. It was already asleep, or something like sleep. Its breathing had slowed, its wings had relaxed outward slightly, gold veins pulsing faintly. "I don't know yet," he said. He found out what he was going to do 18 hours later, when 6 Accord science officers appeared at his door with a containment unit and transfer orders signed by Riss. He stood in the doorway and did not move. The hatchling was on his shoulder. It looked at the 6 officers with its gold eyes. Then it spread its wings, the full span of them, not even as wide as Dario's hand, but very sudden, and it opened its mouth and made a sound that was not small and was not soft. It was a chord, several notes at once, woven together in a way that made no sense from something so tiny. It filled the corridor. Every one of the 6 Accord officers stopped moving, not stepped back, not flinched, stopped completely like a switch had been thrown. Dario looked at them. He looked up at the hatchling. "Okay," he said quietly, "but let's not start with that." He stepped back inside and closed the door. He leaned against it, breathing slowly. The hatchling climbed back to his jaw and was still. Outside, he heard the officers beginning to move again, slowly, uncertain, one of them saying to another, What just?" He had exactly no idea what he was going to do. But she was warm against his neck, and her pulse was steady, and that, right now, was enough to start with. Delegate Oren arrived on a ship that cost more than the entire station's operating budget. He walked off it in long silver robes, with 2 aides and a legal document already open on his data screen, and he went straight to Dario's quarters without stopping to eat or rest, which said something about how seriously the Accord was taking this. He offered full amnesty, a research posting on a core world, and a sum of money that Dario did not think about too carefully, because thinking about it would make the refusal harder. Dario said no. Oren looked at the small blue dragon on Dario's shoulder. She was 6 weeks old now and the size of a large book, her scales deepening, her gold veins brighter, and he said, "Be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," Dario said. "She'll die if you take her." "That is a claim, not a fact." "I know I'm working on making it a fact." Dario had a notebook open on his desk. He had been keeping notes since the day she hatched. 70 pages so far, growth charts, feeding records, sleep patterns, behavioral logs. The kind of notes you keep when you are the only person in the galaxy who knows anything about the thing you are watching, and you are very aware that if you stop watching, the knowledge stops existing. Oren left without the dragon. He did not look happy about it. The next 4 months were the strangest of Dario's life, and he had lived a strange life. He named her Nerra. It was not a grand name. It was the name of a river near where he grew up, back on Earth, a narrow, stubborn river that ran through rocks it had no business running through. It seemed to fit. Nerra grew in ways that did not follow any pattern he could find in the archive. She did not grow steadily, the way most animals did. She grew in bursts, and the bursts happened when they spent long evenings together, him reading, her sitting on the desk watching his face, and she barely grew at all on the days he worked double shifts and saw her only to feed her before sleeping. He started keeping a second chart, tracking his hours with her against her measurements. The correlation was too clear to ignore. She was not growing on food, she was growing on company. Pell thought this was the most remarkable thing she had ever seen in 20 years of biology. She said so, repeatedly, while typing furiously. She had begun publishing anonymized research notes, careful enough that no one could identify the source or the subject. The papers were spreading fast. The Accord scientific community had not seen live Draconith data in 6 centuries. They were hungry for it, even without knowing what they were hungry for. One evening, Dario put on music an old acoustic recording, guitar and nothing else, from a musician who had died 300 years before any of this. He played it while he worked on his notes. Nerra sat on his desk and listened. She was very still, the way she got when something caught her attention completely. He played it twice, then he went to sleep. In the morning, she was humming. Not the recording, something else similar in shape, in feeling, but changed. New notes where the old ones had been, a variation, a response. He sat on the edge of his bunk and listened to her hum something that no one had ever heard before, and he forgot to make coffee, and he was late for his morning survey brief, and he did not care even slightly. He added 30 pages to his notes that day. Rhys had put a surveillance detail on his quarters by month 2. Dario knew about it. His response was to wave at the corridor sensor every morning on his way out, and to occasionally leave a sealed cup of warm station broth outside the door for whoever was pulling the overnight watch. The Caressi officer on the detail, whose name was Fen, did not drink broth. He picked it up every morning anyway and carried it back to the security post and put it on the shelf. By month 3, there were 12 cups on the shelf. He had not thrown a single one away. Nerra learned to fly in month 3. She had been testing her wings for weeks, spreading them and catching air currents from the station's ventilation in short, clumsy hops that ended mostly in controlled crashes against the nearest soft surface. Then one Tuesday, with no particular warning, she simply flew, crossed the room in a smooth arc, wobbled slightly near the window, corrected, and landed on Dario's shoulder with a thump and the air of someone who had always known how to do this. She then refused to leave his shoulder for 6 hours. He missed a briefing. He missed a meal. He sat in his quarters while a 6-month-old extinct dragon sat on his shoulder and occasionally hummed her song, and he felt, with absolute certainty, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. That was the day the message came. He almost didn't open it. It came through an old relay tag, barely active, the kind of address no one used anymore. But the sender ID stopped him. Vorath SCTHARN Heritage Archive. The message was 4 words, I know about her. And then a second line, I am coming, do not let them take her. I have waited 600 years and I will not wait longer. Dario read it twice. He looked at Nerra. She was looking at him with her gold eyes, head tilted, waiting to see what he would do. Okay, he said aloud, to the room, to her, to no one in particular. Something is happening. She hummed 3 notes. He did not know what they meant yet. He was starting to think he would find out. The ship that docked at Marin 7 looked like it had survived several wars and one very bad argument with a debris field. Its hull was patched in at least 9 places. Its clearance codes, when the station scanned them, came back valid, but the authorization date was 214 years old. No one had revoked them because no one had believed the owner was still alive. Elder Vorath walked off the ship slowly. He was reptilian, tall, and very old in the way that old mountains are old, not weak, just compressed by time into something harder and quieter. His skin was deep green with age gray at the edges. His eyes were amber, and they moved straight to Dario the moment he entered the docking bay. Then they moved to Nerra. Vorath stopped walking. Nerra, sitting on Dario's shoulder, went very still. She looked at Vorath with her head lowered slightly, not in fear, in something else, something older than fear, a kind of recognition that came from deeper than memory. She made no sound. Vorath said something in a language Dario did not know. His voice cracked on the last syllable. He pressed one long-fingered hand over his chest. Then Nerra made a sound back, not the chord, not her song, something short and low, almost below hearing. Vorath exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for 6 centuries. They moved to a private room, the 3 of them, plus Pell, who Dario trusted completely, and Commander Rhys, who had simply followed them and whom Dario had decided to stop arguing with. Orin arrived 11 minutes later. No one had told him. Dario suspected he had people watching the docking logs. Vorath sat. He folded his hands on the table and told them the truth. The Draconith, he explained, did not bond with species. They bonded with individuals. A single individual chosen by the dragon, usually within hours of hatching. The bond was permanent. A draconith separated from its bonded partner after imprinting would stop eating, stop growing, stop humming, and within a few weeks, stop breathing. Dario thought about the containment unit the science team had brought to his door. He thought about Central Lab 12 and its cryolock transit system. The Accord would have killed her, Pell said, not a question. Yes, Vorath said, as they killed 11 others over the past 4 centuries, collected as specimens, filed as failed experiments. None of them lasted 3 weeks in containment. He said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse than bitterness. They did not know what they were doing. The files that would have told them were sealed. Sealed by who? Riss said. Vorath looked at him. By the Accord's predecessor organization, after the Setharan War. He paused. The war did not simply happen to my people. It was allowed to happen. Resources were withheld. Warnings were buried. When the Setharan were gone, the records were sealed so that the question of why we fell would never be examined too closely. The room was quiet. Orin had not moved since Vorath started speaking. He was looking at the table. You knew, Dario said to him, not angry, genuinely asking. Orin looked up. Not all of it. I knew the files were sealed. I knew there was a reason. I did not ask what the reason was, because asking would have required doing something about the answer. He paused. That is not an excuse. No, Dario agreed. It isn't. Vorath continued. He explained the chord Nerra's resonance, an evolved defense. In most sentient species, it triggered a deep freeze response, something in the old survival wiring, a full-body pause. It did not work on humans. Human neurological processing was too fast and too chaotic, he said, too many conflicting signals running at once. The pause reflex had nowhere to land. She never tried it on me, Dario said. She never needed to, Vorath said. The chord is for threats. You were never a threat. He looked at Nerra, still on Dario's shoulder, still watching Vorath with that ancient, careful attention. Her coloration confirms the full bond. That gold in her veins, it has not been seen since before the war. It only appears in a complete bond. Deep, stable, chosen freely on both sides. Both sides, Pell repeated. She chose him as much as he chose her, Vorath said simply. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked. They heard the docking alert before Orin's communicator buzzed. Admiral Sovath had arrived with 4 escort ships. He was calling it a diplomatic presence. The 4 ships said otherwise. Sovath came into the room with 6 officers and the contained efficiency of someone who had already made decisions. He looked at Vorath, looked at Nerra, looked at Dario. He said, the Accord will take custody of the specimen for full. Nerra moved. She climbed to the top of Dario's head, spread her wings, a full meter now, cobalt and gold catching the room's light, and she sang. Full resonance, every note at once, layered and enormous from something still so small. Every non-human in the room stopped. Sovath froze mid-word. His officers froze. Riss froze. Orin froze. Even Vorath, old as he was, went still. Pell grabbed the table edge and stayed upright. Humans. Dario looked around at the frozen room. He looked up at Nerra. I know, he said quietly. I know, but let's try talking first. Nerra looked down at him. Her wings stayed open for 1 more second. Then she folded them. She climbed back down to his shoulder. She was still. The room unfroze. Sovath blinked. His hand was halfway to his communicator, and he could not quite remember why. Dario pulled out his battered data folio and set it on the table. I'd like to request a formal tribunal hearing, he said. Full Accord assembly, open record, I have documentation. He tapped the folio. 7 months of it. No one spoke. She's not a specimen, he said. She's not a weapon. She's a person who chose someone to trust, and I'm not going to let that mean nothing. He looked at Sovath, then at Orin, then at the table where the sealed archives shadow sat between all of them like a third party. The truth is in those files. Let's put it in the open where it belongs. Vorath in the corner was not crying, but his eyes were bright. He had waited 600 years for someone to say that. The Accord Central Assembly was the largest room Dario had ever stood in. It was built for species that averaged 2.5 meters tall, so the ceiling disappeared somewhere above the lights. The delegate tiers rose in rings, hundreds of seats, and every one of them was filled. Word had spread faster than the official summons. He walked in with a battered data folio under one arm, Nerra on his shoulder, and Pell one step behind him. That was his entire team. Vorath was already inside, seated in the witness area. He had dressed in the old Setharan colors, dark green and silver, and he sat with the stillness of someone who had rehearsed this moment for a very long time. The hearing was, officially, about Dario's violation of survey protocol, falsified manifest, unauthorized retention of a biological find, standard Accord disciplinary procedure, which usually took about 40 minutes. It lasted 9 hours. The first 2 hours were exactly what everyone expected. A senior Accord legal officer laid out the violations. Riss testified, plainly and without embellishment, about the scan query and the manifest discrepancy. He did not editorialize. He stated what he had observed and stopped. Then Dario spoke. He did not stand at a podium the way the legal officer had. He sat at the witness table, opened his folio, and talked about Nerra. Not about her biology, not about what she was worth or what she could do. About her, the tapping in the egg. The first crack, the 4 hours of silence, the second crack. The way she had looked at his face when she opened her eyes and decided something. The growth charts and what they showed. The music and her response to it. He read from his notes directly, which meant the assembly heard things like, Day 43, she slept for 14 hours and woke up half a centimeter longer. I think she had a dream. She was making small sounds I haven't heard before. And, Day 71, she figured out that if she sits on the scanner, she can feel the vibration when it runs. She does it every time now. The room was very quiet while he read. Not the polite quiet of a room waiting for something important. The real quiet of a room that has stopped expecting to be moved and then been moved anyway. When he finished, he closed the folio. He said, I falsified a log. I did it because the protocol would have killed her, and the protocol didn't know that, and I didn't have time to explain. I'd do it again. He paused. I'm not asking you to let me off. I'm asking you to look at what was in those sealed files and ask why they were sealed, and whether anything done in this room today should happen without that context. Vorath testified next. He spoke for an hour, simply and without drama, about the Setharan, about the war, about 11 Draconith who had died in Accord containment over 4 centuries because nobody had unsealed the files that would have explained how to keep them alive. He named each one. He had kept the names for 600 years, waiting for a room large enough to say them in. Pell presented the biology. Her data was complete, peer-reviewed by 3 independent researchers who had seen only the anonymized version and completely irrefutable. Then Admiral Sovath stood and made the security argument. A bonded Draconith was a significant asset. The resonance ability alone made her a strategic concern. Whoever held influence over the bond held influence over the dragon. The Accord needed oversight. Dario waited until Sovath finished. Then he said, quietly, nobody holds influence over the bond. She chose me. I didn't earn it. I didn't train for it. I didn't apply for it. She looked at my face when she was 20 minutes old and made a decision. She could leave any time. He looked at Nerra. She's sitting on my shoulder right now because she wants to, not because she's contained. That difference is not a small thing. It is the entire thing. Sovath did not respond. He sat down slowly. The room was quiet again. Then Nerra moved. She left Dario's shoulder without warning and flew, low, steady, across the full width of the chamber, which was a long way for an 8-month-old dragon. Every eye in the room followed her. She crossed the witness area, the legal officer's table, the open floor, and she landed on the arm of Delegate Orin's seat in the delegate tiers. She looked at him. Orin looked back. He had known about the sealed files, not all of it, but enough. He had chosen not to ask. And now, the last living Draconith was looking at him from 2 feet away with gold eyes that were very old in a very young face. She made a sound, soft, low, not the chord, something entirely different, something that had no threat in it at all. Orin was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice that did not quite hold steady, "I believe that was forgiveness." He did not deserve it. He knew he did not deserve it. That was perhaps why it hit him the way it did. Nerra flew back to Dario's shoulder. She settled. She was still. The assembly voted 2 hours later. It was not unanimous. It was never going to be unanimous, but it was clear. The Setharan archive was to be unsealed and entered into the full public record. Nerra was classified as a free entity under Accord law, the first of her species to hold that status in 6 centuries. A formal inquiry into the history of the sealed files was opened. And a new legal category was created, which had no precedent and no name until that day: registered companion. Dario Fenwick was listed as the first, and so far, only holder of that designation. He was walking out of the chamber when Rhys fell into step beside him. They walked in silence for a moment. Then Rhys said, "I reported your scan query. I thought I was doing the correct thing." "You were," Dario said. "You were following the rules. The rules were wrong about this one." Rhys was quiet. Then, "I did not understand what I was looking at. I understand it now." It was not an apology. In Caressi culture, it was something closer to an apology than an apology was. Dario nodded. Outside the chamber, Nerra hummed her song against the side of his jaw. He reached up and rested one hand along her back. 9 hours, 70 pages of notes, one small dragon who had chosen someone and one person who had chosen her back. That was all it had taken to crack 600 years of silence open. 6 months after the hearing, Nerra was the size of a large dog. She did not look like a large dog. She looked like something that had stepped out of a story that the universe had stopped telling and then quietly started again. Her scales had deepened from bright cobalt to something richer, the blue of deep water with the light still in it. The gold veins had spread, running all the way down her tail now, fanning out across the underside of her wings. When she stretched those wings indoors, the room felt smaller around her. She was unmistakably a dragon. There was no other word. The archive had descriptions, and the descriptions had been inadequate, and now everyone who saw her in person understood why. She still slept on Dario's shoulder when she could fit, which she increasingly could not. She had adapted by sleeping along the top of his bunk instead, curled close enough that her tail draped over his blanket. He had stopped complaining about this within the first week. The unsealed Setharan archive had changed things. Not fast, nothing in the Accord moved fast, but it was moving. 3 historical inquiries had opened. 2 Accord members had filed formal objections to conclusions they had quietly agreed with for decades. Orin had requested a reassignment to a role in archive transparency, which was a way of saying he intended to spend the rest of his career making sure the filing happened correctly from now on. Nobody had asked him to do that. He had decided it himself. Pell's full research paper, published 4 months after the hearing, with Dario as co-author and Vorath acknowledged as historical consultant. It was, within a year, the most accessed paper in the Accord's scientific database, not because of the politics, because the science was extraordinary, and because anyone who read it could tell they were reading the work of someone who had stayed up too many nights watching something small become something remarkable. 3 different Accord species sent delegations asking how to approach Nerra respectfully. Dario gave them the same answer each time: she decides, you ask, you wait, you don't push, you don't bring containment equipment into the room, you don't think about what she's worth to you before you think about whether she's comfortable. 2 out of 3 delegations found this frustrating. The third came back 6 weeks later with a small gift. A recording of music from their homeworld, left it outside the door, and walked away without asking for anything. Nerra played that recording 11 times in a row. Then she made a response and hummed it at Dario until he found a way to record it and send it back. He had started to understand her slowly, the way you learn a language when there are no teachers and no books, by living close to it and paying attention. She communicated in sound and position and the angle of her head, in which way she turned when she was uncertain and which way when she was decided. He kept notes. Of course he kept notes. By now it was 800 pages. Vorath was dying. Not quickly and not in pain, just old, finally, in a way that 600 years of exile had delayed but could not prevent. He spent most of his time in the station's observation bay, where the viewport was large enough to see the stars properly. Nerra had taken to visiting him there, which she chose to do alone, without Dario. He respected that. One evening Dario came in quietly and sat near the door and watched. Vorath was talking, in the old language, Setharan, the only living speaker, and Nerra was listening with her head down, perfectly still. When he finished, she put her head against his shoulder, very gently, then she hummed. The melody was not hers and not his. It was something in between, built from pieces of what he had said, transformed into sound, made permanent in the only way she knew how to make things permanent. "She's keeping it," Dario said softly from the door. Vorath looked over at him. "Yes," he said, "everything I told her tonight, she'll carry it." He paused. "Languages don't have to die the same way things die if someone holds them right." He was gone 2 months later, quietly in the observation bay, in the dark with the stars. Nerra stayed beside him until the station medics came. Afterward, she flew 3 circuits of the station's outer ring alone and came back and said nothing and ate nothing and sat in the viewport for 12 hours. Dario sat near her. He did not talk. Sometimes that is the whole thing. Admiral Sovath sent a message. It said, "What would you have done differently in my position knowing only what I knew?" Dario read it twice and wrote back, "Probably the same things, that's what makes it hard." Sovath did not reply, but 3 weeks later he filed the recommendation that formally ended the practice of cryotransit for unidentified biological specimens. No explanation attached. Dario did not need one. The second egg was found 6 weeks after that, on a dead world in a different sector. When the survey commander called in the heat signature, ready to seal and freeze per protocol, a voice on the comm channel said, "Don't. Find someone who will hold it against their chest and lose sleep over it. That's how this works. That's the only way this works." The survey commander complied. Dario and Nerra went back to Valathroman 4. It seemed right, after everything. The dead planet looked exactly as it had, grey, quiet, rubble in every direction. He found the spot in Grid 7 without the scanner. He remembered it. Nerra stood beside him, shoulder height now. She looked at the place where the rubble had been, where the amber crystal had protected one small warm thing through an asteroid strike and 6 months of dead silence, and she was still for a long time. Dario looked at the hollow in the ground where he had dug. "Ha," he said, "smaller than I remembered." Nerra turned her head to look at him with one gold eye. Then she made a sound that he had learned, over the past year, to recognize without any doubt at all. It was laughter. He grinned. She spread her wings once, for no reason except that she could. They caught the thin light of the planet's pale sun, and the gold in them blazed. Then she folded them back, turned toward the shuttle, and walked. He walked beside her. Behind them, the Accord's oldest silence sat in the rubble where it belonged, broken open, unburied, finally in the past. Ahead nothing was certain, but ahead was where they were going, together, which was the only direction either of them had ever really known.